the tool that we have that provides the least amount of value in your life is your fucking scale. Okay, get rid of it. Yeah, throw it away. There is nothing that comes from that device that is valuable.
It's very interesting how we underestimate how much psychological pain can really manifest in physiological pain. And that comment just really just poked me in that way.
If you mess around too much as a kid, you're going to pay a price later in life. Well, what we know is that if you're investing in muscle mass and investing in this process in your second third, you go into your third with money in the bank as it relates to muscle.
It's something that we all need to learn a lot more about. And there's a lot more material out there that helps us understand and break it down what it really means to have a healthy metabolism and what we can do to control it better and make it work for us, as opposed to falling in the trap of...
It's the data that you need to make decisions, because our current system won't be able to tease this out until we have that data set.
Hello, welcome back. You said if we are ready, and your dog.
Yeah, I said if we're ready to go, and the dog looked at me and it's like, I am always ready. Where are we going? But no, he's sitting here in my office with me because I didn't want him barking while we're recording.
Yeah,
hi, Klaudia.
Hey, Don. Good
How are
morning.
you doing? You spent a bunch of time in Florida. Did you get some good sun?
Yes, it was so nice. We spent some time on the beach and played some pickleball. And turns out I am absolutely terrible, but I'm learning.
Okay. And
yeah, it's a fun game.
So what do you like better? The Arizona dry or the Florida moist?
I do like the dry, but
I do too.
Yeah, I do like the dry, mostly because my hair gets very frizzy.
Oh, I can imagine. You know,
Yeah, but other
I
than
lived
that,
lived down in Florida for a year, a few years ago. You know, the trip to Florida is interesting. You go down there, usually spring break or something like that. You know, I was spring breaking back in the middle 80s, back when it was crazy. And you get you're like, man, this would be a great place to live. But then you move down there, and I had a great apartment right on the ocean down there in North Palm Beach. But Klaudia, the thing I could not stand is I don't think I turned my air conditioning off for more than 4 or 5 days a year.
Yeah, you can't.
It's just so
because
thick.
of mold. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very thick, even if it's not too hot.
And I like having a breeze come through. And now again, listen, I'm on the 5th floor of this condo and the breeze blew all the time, but you just couldn't turn the air off. You just couldn't. And there's just days I want to turn the air off and open the doors and put the screens in and just let the air turn over, but you couldn't do it there. So I kind of lean towards the desert as well, that I'll sacrifice the ocean for the desert.
Yeah, sometimes there's this December, January time period when you can open the windows, but it doesn't last long. No.
No, in Phoenix, you mean?
No, even in Florida, it's been getting colder. My brother's been telling me and my mom that it's been getting colder in the winter than usual, which is nice. It's refreshing.
And they're kind of in South Florida. They're Fort Myers, Miami area,
Naples.
right? Naples, yeah.
Naples, so the south, the west coast of Florida. So it's the Gulf of America, Florida.
We were down there. Now, I don't know if you've experienced the red tide stuff that happens over there on the Gulf side. But
it does.
I was down there working, and I'd visited some doctors over in the Venice Beach area, and I didn't want to, I lived on the East Coast. I didn't want to drive. It was late. I didn't want to drive across. So I'm looking for a hotel, and I find this beachfront hotel in Venice on like Hotels Tonight or something like that. And I'm thinking, my God, what a find. And it was like $120 a night. It was awesome. You know, one of these classic Florida situations. And I'm thinking, I have hit the jackpot. Well, as I drove towards the beach in Venice with the top down on my car, I smell, and it's just this acrid smell, and it just keeps coming. Well, they were right in the middle of a full red tide thing, and you didn't even want to be close to the beach. It was awful. So yeah, these big environmental things that happen down there are pretty interesting.
Yeah, that is the biggest scare for me. The red tide that impacts a lot of people's lungs. It's just very inflammatory to breathe in. And of course, hurricanes seems to be getting harder and harder and stronger every year. And it's just just a lot of rebuilding. Like when I was there now, there's this one island where my mom works called Sanibel, super adorable, like a
I
tiny
love
village island,
Sanibel.
beautiful, very sweet looking. And some of the areas are just getting recovered and rebuilt from 3 years ago, Ian hitting the island. So it just takes a long time to rebuild after such catastrophe. And these things occur a lot more frequently nowadays than every 3 years. So that is everything has a little cost, and in Florida is the
So if you
very
Sanibel is the first one. If you go past Sanibel, you go to Captiva, correct?
Mhm.
Isn't that the way it works? So out
Yes.
on Captiva, there's this little restaurant that's called the Bubble Room. I don't know if you've ever been there
I
or not.
think I've been there. Yes, I think I've been
The,
there.
the prime rib and the red velvet cake are just ridiculous. But that was one of our stops. Is we'd go out and there's a little bar out there on Captiva called the Mucky Duck, and we would go get a pitcher of beer at the Mucky Duck and watch the sunset, and then go grab dinner at the Bubble Room. And apparently they both made it through the last big hurricane. So, but that's my little travel tip of the day. If you're down in Fort Myers, get out there to Captiva and have a drink, watch the sunset on at the Mucky Duck, and then go because the Bubble Room's all decorated in Christmas stuff. It's Christmas year
Yes, it's
round.
adorable.
So we always really enjoyed that.
I didn't know you've been down that way. That's awesome.
Well, I have a mother-in-law that lives just south of there, so we don't go very often, but we don't go anymore actually. Yeah, I've spent, like I said, listen, I got a couple years under my belt. Again, I'm third, you're second, third. And so with that, you pick up some experiences. So that's one that definitely stuck with me. I really enjoy it
That's
and I recommend it.
that is so cool. Yeah, it's an adorable little couple of islands. It's absolutely worth the trip, and you can bike around it.
Hmm.
Super sweet. That's awesome. Well, biking and pedaling into this episode, we are going to be doing something different than usual. We wanted to give you, our audience, a bit of a review of what we've talked about so far, in case you missed it, in case you have any questions, in case we have any new information, and just kind of let you in on what happened. So if you missed it, you could go back and listen to a specific episode. You don't have to listen to all the way through, although we would like it. And yeah, we're going to dive through one at a time.
Well, and for the audience, it's important. None of this information is static. None of it is carved in stone. We are learning things every day. And this is why it's so important. And along the way, we pick up. I know I've made some misstatements in earlier episodes. We're not going to go back and try and clean all that up. But this is a dynamic space that we're in. And again, the science is changing daily. If Don't feel frustrated if you think, man, this is what I knew a year ago, or this is what I knew 10 years ago. Well, the science has changed. We've learned more, and that's a good thing.
I am so glad you brought that up, because that's something I'm seeing in this industry where, new science emerges and people change their mind. Like, oh, I used to believe this, but science now shows something else. And maybe I should evolve my thinking and evolve how I have thought about this process or this type of behavior for a while now. So change is good.
Changes
And actually, there is
always good.
change is always good. The previous episode, I'll get to it once we start talking about episode 13. When I was editing it, I totally misspoke. And I'm like, darn it. It was like one of those things where I said something that um, I'll get to it later, but it was like, no way. How did I not recognize that that was totally not what I wanted to say? But we all make
It
mistakes.
happens.
Yeah.
That's
All
that's
right.
why
So
we
we
can
have
re-record.
Yes, we could re-record. Episode 1, HRV. That was
Mhm.
our intro episode. It's very close to both of our hearts. How was your HRV this morning?
Yeah, actually, not too bad. I'll tell you what I've been playing with is I have a new toy. I've been following a thing called vagal nerve stimulation, and I was a panelist on a workshop that my friends at Heads Up Health did. And I'd heard this speaker, Dr. Nawaz Habib, which I love his book, Resetting Your Vagal Nerve. It's excellent. It's excellent. And HRV is something I've been looking at for 30 years. Okay. I've been doing this for a long time and I'm learning things that just right and left. But so I've been doing vagal nerve stimulation, not quite seeing the impact that I thought I would see, but I do believe we're starting to see some. But to answer your question, my nighttime resting HRV last night was in the 50s, which for me is my low end of normal. I've not been able to trigger those 80s and 90s that I did back in February when we were up in Lake Tahoe. And I'm starting to think that elevation affects me more than I thought it did. I know when I'm up in the mountains, I am happier. I am as at peace as I get. Now, whether it's just the vistas, and vistas are important. It's important that you get yourself into the outside and you set your eyes on a wide vista, whether it's an ocean or a mountain range or things like that, or a desert, but get outside. There's definitely a vagal impact from that. There's definitely an impact on your HRV from that. But I'm starting to think it's more than that. I'm starting to think that my body likes a little bit of elevation. I know my truck likes it. I know my gas mileage in my truck improves when I'm at altitude. But I'm starting to think maybe it's affecting me as well.
Yeah, I mean, very much so possible. I mean, as much as you mentioned, just looking out into the distance, it has a calming and a safety
Mhm.
feeling brought about in your body when you can see far, because in our ancestors, seeing far means you have more control over what's around you, so you can see the danger if it's coming faster.
I remember reading this. There was a really interesting book I read many years ago called The Exuberant Animal. And they were talking about this work with vistas, but then I heard Dr. Habib talking about it as well, as being able to set that. There's a mental reset that comes with that. There's a vagal reset that comes with that. So there's going on that vacation, getting that time, getting out of your box, getting out into the environment. There's value to just getting morning sunlight in your eyes. There's value to getting evening sunlight in your eyes. The reset, particularly in the morning when it's resetting the circadian rhythm. But and I remember in The Exuberant Animal, they were talking about big game will sit on the edge of these cliffs or these big vistas, and they hypothesized that it was, they could see they could see their predators. Well, they went on to say, well, it's more than that. And like I said, man, I'll tell you what, when I'm in the mountains, Claudia, I am at peace. I really am at peace. And again, that was in February. That was really showing up in my numbers.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I believe in one of the episodes we actually show your data. So it
Hmm.
was very interesting to dive into a graph from Heads Up Health that you have with your aura to see how your HRV and heart rate responded you being at elevation. So that was very
Because
interesting.
I'm duplicating the workloads right now, and I'm pretty much duplicating the rest of the lifestyle stuff. Listen, I've just gone through a rather dynamic employment setup, starting back in the middle of November all the way up until the beginning of May. And listen, that's stress. The three biggest changes in your life, three biggest challenges, are new relationship, new job, and new home. No, I guess a new baby falls in there somewhere. Well, it's that's been a bit. First of all, my home moves with me, so we're usually somewhere else in the country all the time. But I've been in the same relationship now been married for 35 years, been in the same relationship for 37. So I think we've got that stabilized. Um, but there's just little things. So I've duplicated the workloads. I've got my sleep pretty much lined up. But I'm not popping those nighttime averages of 70, 80, 90 like I was. So I'm still working on it. So the vagal nerve stimulator looks pretty interesting. I'll tell you, the data on it is ridiculous. And maybe we do a bigger episode on that down the road. But certainly something that's been fun to play with.
I would like that because I did start to read the book that you sent me,
Hmm.
Upgrade Your Vagus Nerve. I should say listen to it.
Great book.
And, it's very interesting because then I, at the same time, got assigned an article to write about vagus nerve. So
Good for
it's
you.
just very serendipitous. It's all coming together. We're like, "All right, it's time for you to dive into the topic."
It's
And,
nice
so
when the
yeah.
universe has multiple vectors hitting you, right?
Yeah, it's telling me, "You need to learn more about vagus nerve and learn how to
Yes,
communicate it."
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
So that
and
was very interesting.
there's still a lot to learn. And I'll tell you, then we moved down to an application level. I had a situation, I think I talked about this in the last podcast. I have a former student of mine who's a Division 1 lacrosse coach, women's lacrosse coach. And she called me, and one of their key players had been concussed. and they're like, what should we do with this? Should we do supplements and things like that? And the team doctor was not taking a very proactive approach with them. Kind of, they felt blown off. They felt just like, okay, here's the recipe, follow this recipe. And they wanted something more than that. So we had discussions about this. I said, first of all, the physician determines whether your concussion is serious or not. They decide when you go back to play. When you decide to go back to play, then you can take my advice from a sports performance standpoint. But the thing that was going through my head, I remember watching this presentation out in Las Vegas at A4M on this vagal nerve stimulator. It's called Truvaga, and they were military is using it in traumatic brain injury, which is concussion, but they're also using it in in learning. So soldiers that use vagal nerve stimulation when they're learning a second language learn faster. Soldiers that use vagal nerve stimulation, they learn to pick out targets or deviations of targets better than people who don't. So there's an improved cognitive response that came with this. To me, it was just fascinating. So that's kind of where, and I took it and I said, so if a soldier can pick out a surface to air missile array better on a radar or on a photo, can a lacrosse goalie see a ball being shot at them better if they vagal stimulate too? So now we're never going to have a study that determines that. You know, at an applied level, I take a look at like, okay, this looks like a technology that I would put my goalies in with. There's several things I'd be working with my goalies with, but this is one based on what they're doing in the military. I would absolutely have my athletes doing this, getting ready for competition.
And it sort of makes sense to once you have a higher parasympathetic drive, then you respond to your environment much better. You notice a lot more things than if you're because when we're in fight or flight, we're just a little bit more scattered. We may miss certain stuff.
We don't care to learn in fight or flight. We care to
Yeah.
survive. Yeah.
Yes.
And you've got to get that parasympathetic boost in order to get you know what, the hormones on this are funky. Lowering the cortisol, getting the BDNF, getting the other hormones rolling in the brain are interesting. And again, that's all going to be driven through the vagal nerve, through your autonomic nervous system. So that's what really got my attention when I started to dig into this. You know, I've joined a group called the Autonomic Institute or something like this, that just all they do is this is academics that are looking at autonomic function and they're looking at these kinds of things. And at the end of the day, HRV is a measurement of autonomic function. Okay, so as you're improving those things, and again, if you're in fight or flight all the time, if you're in stress, it's hard to learn. Okay. And, you know, this is going to apply to schools. This is going to apply to education. If you've got someone coming into your school who's coming out of a threatening home environment, whether it's poverty or violence or sexual abuse or things like that, you can't expect that kid to learn. They're just trying to survive. So this is a really interesting topic, and I think we have a ton to learn about it.
Yes. We're definitely going to put that on our schedule because it's a good one. And then everybody can use a little bit more parasympathetic drive because we're spending way too much time in sympathetic.
We do stress very well. We're very good at it, and we're just starting to understand the cost.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. But HRV is a very good indicator to understanding how your nervous system is responding to a lot of those stressors that you're exposing them to. And you and I talked about it a lot, how it is a very valuable feedback loop to look at over periods of time to really see where things are trending.
I
And
believe
what would you say? What would you?
I believe
Go
there's
for it.
evidence to suggest we don't have a better indicator right now than HRV when it looks at lifestyle, quality of life, learning, all the things that we value. There may not be a better tool. And
Mhm.
right now, I'm getting ready to do a webinar for Heads Up Health here in a couple days, where we're talking about HRV as an indicator for physicians. Why should you have this in your practice? So, you know, the bibliography on this presentation right now. I think I'm up to 35 to 40 references in this. So I've been really digging into the papers and looking at this. Let me go back to my student who's the coach. At the end of the day, if every one of those athletes had an Aura ring or an equal quality wearable device. There's a paper a friend of mine sent me the other day. They were looking at traumatic brain injury, light traumatic concussion, and the data couldn't distinguish whether you could use HRV to measure this or not. But the study was looking at athletes that had a concussion and athletes who didn't. Well, the problem with that is that HRV is so dynamic between us based on our background, based on the trauma we've been through, based on all the things we do. Now, if I have data from an athlete from a month ago when they weren't concussed to a month after concussion, I now have a good comparative data set. I can now make some decisions with that. And I believe the window's even closer than 60 days. But at some point in time, we've got to get the data on board. We've got to measure it. There's got to be a value there. Now, part of the challenge here is that when I start having a conversation with a coach, a college team or a coach, I get immediate pushback from the sports medicine group that, oh, this data may be used inappropriately. And I'm like, no, this is wearable data that every Joe Bag of Donuts can go out and buy off the internet right now. But they're so concerned with data privacy that they don't even want to go into this space. And I'll tell you, I've had some conversations with athletic directors that would just knock you over. The fact I had an athletic director say to me one time, "We don't want that data. We don't want to be liable
Why?
for it." They
Just
didn't want to be
privacy?
liable for it. And my response was, "Well, you may not be liable for it right now, but you will be in a few years when this becomes mainstream and you don't have it, you will be liable for it at that point." So this is new ground for many of these big organizations, and frankly, they're afraid of it. So, but there's no doubt in my mind. We're having this conversation today. Reason we do the podcast is because there's so much value. We want to get it out there, and I don't think there's a better indicator right now.
Yeah, and I think we talked about having just 1% shift in each episode, and this one is really to start tracking HRV. Because if you're tracking something, that is one of the main metrics, along with resting heart rate, that truly gives you such a fantastic insight.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they come with some good cars hooked behind that engine. The train of data that comes is that, yeah, you're getting HRV, but you're also getting some interesting sleep insights. And you're starting to, oh my God, I came across this paper on alcohol, the impact of alcohol. And it's an old paper. I've used it before, but it reminded me when it came up that literally drinking 4 beers before you go to bed cut your restorative sleep in half. Okay. 8 hours of sleep became 4 hours of restorative sleep. Now they were sleeping. The problem is that alcohol is getting burned off. It's being metabolized. That's a sympathetic response. So you're not dropping into deep sleep and you don't get into deep sleep. So literally when I went back and was reviewing this data, I'm like, that's a good piece. And I'm going to drop it in that presentation, actually, that getting people to make new decisions, you got to give them good data. And we talked about this in the last episode. We talked about
Yes.
there's culture, you have decisions, you have information, you got to make a decision. It starts that loop. And if you want to break the loop, you got to put data in. So this is where this comes into play. And it's incredibly valuable.
That's very interesting. That's awesome. And before we jump into episode 2, I did want to add that it's super eye-opening because I've come across a similar study, if not the same. And a lot of people think that, oh, but alcohol makes me fall asleep faster. I just literally get knocked out like a kid. But what they don't realize is that they remain in that light phase of sleep and they don't tap into those restorative stages like the deep and the REM. So their brain and their body is actually not recovering at all.
No, not at all.
So
Yeah.
that's the problem with perception and data, where you perceive something in one way, but the data will tell you the complete opposite sometimes.
It cut sleep in half. Okay. It cut it in half. It's so, and you know what? I remember sharing this. Klaudia, when I was an athlete, we were wild. Okay. unapologetically, we enjoyed ourselves immensely. And there were many 6 o'clock a.m. practices I showed up to, and I probably couldn't have passed a breathalyzer at that practice. Luckily, I didn't have to blow into one, but I could get through the practice. I could do it, and I could do it pretty well. Just because you can do the work doesn't mean it's contributing. I did a lot of work that went like flushing it down the toilet. It contributed nothing to my success. So when I sit down with an athlete now and I look at, okay, this is what your sleep looks like, and we were doing 24-hour studies using a first beat bodyguard, 24 48-hour studies, and I would sit there and show it to them. Oh my God, we'll have to do an episode when they're sleeping with their mate and when they're not. I've got some great stories there. Just having someone in bed next to you, not you're both sleeping, but when you're your age and your reproductive age, you've got hormones that are running, and when the bed rustles, the subconscious says, "Hey, what is that?" And that is not good restorative sleep. So this is where that term sleep divorce comes from.
I've
My
heard,
wife and
yeah.
I did this for a long time. That when we were dealing with some stress stuff, I went and slept in the extra bedroom. I got great sleep. She got great sleep. And when you're working through this kind of time in your life, it's good. It's not a step towards separation. It's actually a step towards a better relationship when you manage it well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's Cameron Diaz who does sleep divorce with her husband that have gone very public. Anyways, next
It's legit.
episode yeah, we talked about VO2 and VO2 max,
Mm-hmm.
volume of oxygen that has become really one of the strongest predictors of longevity and health span. And it's not something that is so commonly known to test for in the general public. It's very popular
Yeah.
in athletics.
Testing for VO2 can be hard. First of all, if you're doing a true VO2 max test, that means you're going to max. You don't have another step. You're on that treadmill, and if you take another step, you're falling and shooting off the back of it. That's max. Okay. And we've got mouthpiece in you. We're measuring the oxygen and the CO2 in real time. It's a hard test. Most people don't want to do that. Now, most people don't need to do that. There are valuable metabolic points that come long before max. I don't do many VO2 maxes. I rarely do them. I look for what's called threshold, the part where we go from majority of energy coming from oxidative or oxygen sources to where a majority of our energy is coming from anaerobic without oxygen sources. I want that. That's the point I really want. And we can see that with the right VO2 analyzer. We can see VO2, CO2, and breathing rate, what we call RQ. Um, I watch RQ very closely. That's my gold point. Okay. And you get that if it's done right, you see that in a VO2 test. But again, as your VO2 involved, now here's the point. If you have a VO2 of 80, okay, you're in pretty good shape. Okay, you're pretty fit. You have a lot of excellent metabolism. Still doesn't protect you from getting hit by a bus if you step into traffic. There's still a threat of death that comes with that, and there's other issues that come with that. And so, just because we don't have a VO2 of 60, 70, or 80 doesn't mean that we check the box, screw it, I'm going to go live dangerously. It But we can see a change in our fitness. It's the process, it's not the destination. So get involved with the process, and we can see the improvement in the process with our nighttime resting heart rate. So the amount of energy it takes us to live at night when we're sleeping, as our VO2 improves, that number will drop. So we have proxy measures that can be very valuable, and you don't have to get on a treadmill and go till you puke.
Yeah, it's
That
a very
happens.
interesting test. I did the test recently after we had recorded that episode, and I did the
Mm-hmm.
test with the stationary bike, not the
Mm-hmm.
treadmill. The
That's my
stationary
preferred.
bike, yes, definitely safer, but man, it was hard. It was because they incrementally they increase the
Tension.
what's it called? The tension, yes. So it becomes harder and harder and harder to pedal. So it's measuring with the mask on how your body, what are you exhaling? And
Hmm.
based on that, it can determine whether you're burning fat for energy or burning sugar for energy. And studies obviously show that the more fat you burn for energy, the more efficient your metabolism is at higher intensity. And it was very eye-opening to see how much of a sugar burner I am, just burning 80% of my energy from sugar, 20% from fat, which I thought was gonna be a little bit more, even if not even, a little bit more fat
Yeah.
burner.
You didn't get that
But
confirmation bias you were going for.
nope, I did not. So it really gave me all right, Claudia, you need to work on stuff and you really need to work on getting that metabolic flexibility higher, because I had worked on it years and years ago, which got me through being ever hangry, but I never put the data behind it. So having put that data there just was very interesting.
Those oxidative hormones, the hormones that cause you to be able to liberate fat and then metabolize it, those hormones are lazy. Okay. And if they don't have to work because you're bringing in carbohydrates, you know what? They will sit there and they won't work and they'll back down. I'm pretty comfortable making the statement that probably 95 out of 100 people that would do that test would find the same thing you found. Okay. And here's what it tells us: you got to invest in zone 2 and zone 3. You got to do a good job of building your oxidative energy consumption systems. Oh, and by the way, if your VO2 is 70, you got to do the same damn thing. Okay. If you're trying to win the Tour de France, they're spending an enormous amount of time in that zone 2 and zone 3. They're not out climbing mountains every day. They're doing what that we used to in cycling, we call it junk miles. Out there just riding junk miles. Well, they're not junk. There's huge metabolic benefits that come from this. Science is very clear. But again, everybody has access to whether you're getting better or not when you're looking at that nighttime resting heart rate. That's a very valuable KPI. It's a very valuable indicator for you on what's going on with your fit.
Yes. And I think it's something people could do every 6 months to kind of see, can you see some changes within as much as 6 months?
You can, but there's a couple pieces of data that come into this. So until recently, we used to use the language that in highly trained individuals, the VO2 max is not very dynamic. It's pretty stable in highly trained individuals. Well, there's some data coming out that no, if you really dump into your zone 2, 3 buckets, and I'm talking about probably doubling or tripling the time, quadrupling the time that you're there. Not everybody has the ability to do that. Okay. And this is part of the challenge. There's still a health benefit that comes. You'll see an improvement in resting VO2. You'll see a resting heart rate, excuse me. VO2 would be the same. Um, but but you can see a movement in that number, but you've got to pour a lot of energy into that. Now, there's a lot of fitness experts out there on the internet that'll talk about doing high interval training, high intensity interval training to improve VO only if you have a base. If you don't have the base, the hit training will not drive up VO2. But if and you know what? Truth be told, I probably spend a little too much time doing my base 2-3 work and not enough doing zone 5 work. Claudia,
The other
I've done I've done so much damn zone 5 work in my life. I'm just like I don't want to go there. I've done that work. I want to do work that fulfills me, that reinforces, and I'm fine pouring the extra time into zone 2, 3. Now, and again, my fitness is changing right now. We've talked about the fact that I had a life event 4 years ago. I had a knee surgery that I got very ill from, and it's taken me a long time to work my way back from that. And I'm just to the point really in January where I'm able to do consistent long-term workloads. I can do 6 to 10 hours of zone 2, 3 work a week. I can get that done. Before I couldn't do that. My knee would not take it.
Mhm.
I'm just getting to the point to where my knee's putting up with it. I'm able to get in. You know what? If in another 3 or 4 months, if I've got a good solid base built, I'll probably start to look at throwing some intervals in. Um, and And the thing that we learn about interval work here is you don't need to do 10 100-yard repeats on the track with 200 meters. And I mean, you don't have to just bury yourself. Literally 1, 2, 3, 4 reps of maximal work with an indeterminate amount of time between hand, you get that high intensity response. Okay, so, but you got to make sure you got the base to deal with it, because that puts a lot of stress on the system. And your system may say, nah, I don't think we're going to do that. And you'll start cramping and things breaking and things not working. So you got to make sure you're ready for it.
And it's tough to really know if you're not measuring anything, what zone you are. So again, it comes back down to having some type of wearable that really measures your active heart rate and monitors where your heart rate zones are.
Did you ever use the Carol bike? Did you ever see that?
I've tried it before. I've never used it consistently, but I've
Yeah.
tried it.
The Carol bike is an interesting piece of technology that took this maximal work, 1 or 2 maximal reps, and put it in between recovery work, and they've
Mhm.
programmed it into that device. It's pretty cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I programmed that Carol protocol into my bike erg, and my body, I like a little bit more than 2 reps. So when I programmed that in and I started doing that, now listen, I'm a little different. I've been a Division I athlete. I've got a metabolism that's a little different than most people. That's the reason we're able to do what we did. You know what? My body, I didn't really start to see the decline in performance until I got out to my 6th and 7th rep. So when I'm doing that Carol protocol, I'm usually doing it for 4 or 5 reps, not 2.
Yeah.
2, I was just leaving too much on the table. And again, that's the difference between people. I have one physiology, you have another, and everybody else is different. You got to figure out what's right for you. But you're absolutely right. I don't think there's a more valuable investment that you make when you start this exercise journey and really trying to get than to buy a heart rate monitor. It's valuable.
100%. And in that episode 2, we talk more and more about this. So if you missed it and you want to learn more, I encourage you to go back, because we have to pedal on, because we'll never get to 13.
This is
So,
episode
episode
67, and
3.
we're still covering.
So, episode 3, we talked about loneliness and depression and just how one fuels the other. And it was very interesting. Actually, we recently got a comment on one of the shorts from that episode, and somebody said that their loneliness is so extreme it literally physically hurts. And
That's too bad.
it's terrible, and it's so true. I mean, it can manifest, and yes, psychological pain can manifest as physiological pain and
Absolutely.
can show up even in your data.
Yes.
And we so often can say, "Oh, you're just imagining it." And like, that's not so true.
That is nearly always the wrong answer. It may be what you want to, but you should just shut your mouth and
Yeah.
not say that.
Yeah, I agree. So it's very interesting how we underestimate how much psychological pain can really manifest in physiological pain. And that comment just really just poked me in that way. Like, yes, we talked about loneliness, and even just ruminating over being lonely creates a higher pain experience than actually being lonely. And it all goes back to also depression and all of these issues that we deal with in our society, with the social isolation that we are experiencing in this insane epidemic right now.
It's And if you've heard me talk before, you heard me talk about what I call rocks in the jar. The big rocks that you need to get in for, this 90% healthy. What do we need to do? Well, you need to move. And if you're moving, you need to move more and start thinking about it. You need nutrient dense food. You need good sleep. You need good light in your eyes and on your skin. But they all go into the jar of purpose. You need to have a reason, because our environment is pushing back on us so hard. We have so many things that cause us not to move. We have so many opportunities to eat poorly. Eating poorly may resolve the hunger, but it does not drive the nutritionals necessary for our systems to work correctly. We have so many things pushing us not to sleep well. You know what? My wife and I were watching the Dancing with the Stars. This is not Dancing with the Stars, The Voice. We were watching The Voice final episode last night. I am normally asleep by 10 o'clock. Okay. I'm normally in bed by 9 and I'm normally asleep by 10. Well, my data last night showed me I didn't get to sleep until about 11:05 because we were watching Dancing with the Star, excuse me, The Voice. Well, you know what? I made a choice. Okay, I wanted to watch it, but and missing, changing my go to sleep time by one night is not going to be a problem if I've got 7 or 10 days prior to that where I get it right. So being perfect is not the goal. Being consistent is the goal. Being able to get this in, but knowing that the environment is pushing back on you. That phone that is so valuable will steal quality light. It will steal attention. It will steal sleep. You've got to be able to put it down. And oh, by the way, you've got to get outside. You've got it. We at the beginning of the episode, we were talking about when your eyes are on a vista, whether it's getting out, just getting out and getting your eyes on the horizon is so important because it's driving the chemicals that lead to loneliness and depression. That's what's happening. This is a chemical, this is a hormonal issue. This isn't I don't, you know what, for the longest time in the exercise industry, we said weight loss is a function of thermodynamics, calories in, calories out. That's wrong. Okay, that's actually bullshit. Weight loss and weight gain is an issue of hormones. And this is the reason GLP-1s are doing so well, because this is a hormone that's actually directing the issue. Well, the same thing with depression and loneliness and things like that. If you move more, if you get nutrient dense food, if you get your sleep right, if you get light in your eyes at the right times of day, loneliness and depression will be resolved. And we cannot emphasize enough that if you're dealing with depression, if you're dealing with loneliness, there are professionals that are excellent resources here. Get a good counselor. Okay. And this is what's so important here, because this is you don't need a personal trainer, you don't need a business coach. Get a counselor to help you deal with, okay, what's going on, but know that you have to deal with the body too. You have to deal with the movement, you have to deal with the nutrition, you have to deal with the sleep, and you've got to deal, and then get a purpose. What is it you wake up every day to do? Um, and whether that's because you're a mom or a dad, or whether that's something else, that purpose long term down the road is what drives so much of this.
We so much underestimate the power of spending time with another human being and actually making the effort to spend time with another human being. Because that's what I see sometimes today, that people canceling each other very frequently
Mm-hmm.
because I just don't want to drive all the way there and it's just traffic. And like, come on. Like, I just spent 2 weeks in Florida with my family. I can tell you my time scrolling and being on social media was the fraction of what it is
Yeah,
when I'm home,
yeah.
because am so charged from being with those whom I love, with just hanging out and spending time and be joking around and having conversations. And it's just so recharging and firing and just filling me with this happy chemicals much more than any type of social media scroll. As much as they'd say, oh, I'm connected, I'm chatting with 10 people right now, but it's so different.
As we make content to go onto social media. But yeah, we approach this because we think there needs to be a counterbalance. There needs to be a little bit there. And we hope that this podcast turns into that. But you're absolutely right. Now, Claudia, let me ask you a question. Do you like working out with other people or do you like to train by yourself?
I both. I did work out a lot together with my brother and their group while I was there, and I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed
Really?
that. I enjoy having leg day on my own because I have my own, type of routines and type of exercises I like to do, but I really enjoy a good circuit training with friends.
Hmm. That's right. I do not like training with other
I
people.
I
I like
remember
training
you
by
said that you
myself.
like your own
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Well, for so long, you couldn't keep up with me. I mean, when I throw the switch and we're going, you just can't hang. But yeah, now listen, I'm now considerably older. I'm 3 times older than I was back then, and I'm easy to keep up with, but I still like the solitude. I still like the meditative aspect of working out. When I get in that rhythm, when I get in that role, when I get into flow, I don't want to be distracted by conversation. So it goes both ways, but I am absolutely a very gregarious person. You know what my wife will tell you, if you can't find me, it's because I'm talking to someone, and I don't mind that. Yes, we do like that, but I tend to like to work out on my own. I've got my headphones on, and yeah, don't bother me.
That's funny. I mean, we're all different. And yeah, I like it both ways.